Welcome to this virtual session. This is the second day of our virtual Compliance Officers Conference Week. Today we'll be covering SQE, and at 2:30 this afternoon we have your compliance queries. Now you may be familiar about how our webinars work, but just in case, we want this session to be as interactive as possible. We've already had some questions sent in advance, for which thank you, and we'll be picking those up. But you can also submit live questions by clicking on the question link below this video. You can include your name, but you also have the option to ask questions anonymously. We'll try and answer your questions as we go through the webinar. We've emailed you the full biographies of all our speakers as part of the conference program. This video will be available to watch again, as well as the slides and links to relevant resources on our on-demand webpage. This is linked below the video. Feel free to share this with colleagues, and we'd encourage you to do so. In terms of how this will work, first we'll hear from each of our panelists before taking your questions. But before we start with the questions, let's make some introductions. I'll hand over first to Julie, just to introduce herself.
Hello, yes, I'm Julie Swan. I'm Director of Education and Training at the SRA.
And Kerry.
Hi everyone, my name is Kerry Gilbert. I'm the Vice Chair of the Solicitor Trailblazer Group, and I'm also Apprenticeship Manager at TLT.
And Sian.
Hi, my name is Sian Saunders, and I'm a qualified solicitor and partner at Wettam & Green.
Thank you very much to all of you. Delighted to have you on this panel for this session. And as I say, full biographies of all our speakers on all sessions are available on the conference program that you have a link to. So I have a few set questions which I will pose to each of the panelists, but please do get your thinking hats on for questions you may want to put to them. Julie, I'm going to hand over to you next.
Thank you. Well, the SQE is approaching its 4th birthday. The first assessments were held in November 2021, so it's time for a 4-year stocktake. I'm going to do a quick reminder of what the SQE is and why we introduced it, say something about the SQE standard, and then look at some headline facts and figures. So my quick reminder, the SQE is in 2 parts. SQE1 assesses candidates' ability to apply their knowledge of law and legal practice to the range of scenarios a newly qualified solicitor might encounter in practice. SQE1 uses multiple choice questions, and if you want to understand more about the types of questions used in SQE1, you can find past questions on the SQE website. Kaplan has also, over the summer, released a short video explaining how the questions are written, and it's also published information explaining why we use MCQs. MCQs are a really effective and efficient way of assessing whether candidates can apply their knowledge to scenarios. MCQs are very widely used in professional high-stakes assessments, and they're a good way of assessing application of knowledge. SQE2 assesses both application of knowledge, but also the skills of advocacy, drafting and writing, interviewing, case and matter analysis and research. And for SQE2, there are written and oral assessments. Again, you can find a sample of questions on the websites. Now, the 4 facts I'd really like you to take away from my 10 minutes or so this morning are, firstly, everyone taking the SQE is assessed in the same way to the same standard. The questions, both for SQE1 and SQE2, are written by solicitors. The standard required to pass is that required of a newly admitted solicitor. And again, it is solicitors, including those who are very familiar with working with the newly admitted, who determine what the standard should be. And finally, everyone who performs to the required standard in the assessments will pass. There's no quota. So, as I've said, the SQE is very similar in form to high-stakes license to practice exams used in other professions and in other jurisdictions, but it is different in many ways to the LPC, and we know that it includes features that are perhaps unfamiliar to those that have been in legal practice for a while. On the LPC, training providers wrote and marked their own assessments. We tended to talk on the LPC about completion rather than pass rates, but it means broadly the same thing. But completion rates for LPC courses range from 100% for some providers down to under 30% for others. And we found we couldn't provide assurance that everyone was being assessed to the same standard. We certainly knew they weren't being assessed in the same way. The SQE also differs from the LPC because the SQE is assessing somebody's readiness to practice as a solicitor, whereas the LPC practice somebody's readiness to work as a trainee. In other words, the SQE is deliberately set at a higher level of demand than the LPC. Because of the safeguards that the SQE provides, we've been able to remove some of the barriers that did stand in the way of qualification for many years, notably the need to complete a prescribed course and also a 2-year period of recognised training. We do have a qualifying work experience requirement, QWE, but QWE is much more flexible than the training contract or recognised period of recognised training, because it's the SQE that's doing the heavy lifting of assessing whether an individual is competent to practice as a solicitor. I mentioned that we've been able to lift the requirement on candidates to undertake a prescribed course, as was the case with the LPC. And with the SQE, candidates have much more choice. They can decide how they prepare for their assessments. And while many do still take a traditional style course, that's not necessary, and others are choosing to prepare in different ways. We can see 4 years on that the training market has responded really well. There's a wide range of choice for candidates, long and short courses, face-to-face, online, hybrid courses, and some candidates buy training materials to support their independent study. The length of the course varies widely, as do the fees charged. Some candidates are successfully preparing quite independently for their assessments, maybe buying materials, as I've said, to support their studies, or perhaps studying by themselves and then taking some mock exams, which are also available to purchase. And you can find out more about the wide range of training options on the SRA website. You can also find some case studies that we've released over recent months where we've interviewed candidates who have studied in different ways. And it's really interesting, I think, to understand from individuals why they chose to study in different ways and how it worked for them. Now, I know a lot is said about SQE pass rates. Just to be absolutely clear, the pass rate is simply the percentage of candidates who took an assessment and who passed. The passing standard for each assessment is the same whenever and wherever the assessment is taken. And there's lots of safeguards in place to make sure this is the case. So pass rates do vary, and they vary, we've seen, by sitting, but they only vary because of the proportion of candidates who perform to the required standard varies. Some cohorts of candidates will be more able and or better prepared than others, for example. We saw, and I know there's been lots again said about this, that the July 2025 SQE1 candidates were overall weaker than the candidates who took previous SQE1 sittings. The pass rate was therefore lower. That's not to say there weren't some really very able candidates in that cohort, but overall the cohort was weaker. It also had the highest proportion of resitting candidates we've yet seen. The pass rate was low. One way we can assure ourselves that the standard is consistent across each sitting is by placing common questions in every paper, and all the papers whenever the sittings take place. And this enables us to compare the performance of candidates with previous sittings. What we saw in July was that fewer candidates correctly answered those common questions than had candidates in previous sittings. But let's look at a few headline figures. And 4 years on, I think it's time to celebrate the success of the many candidates who have now passed. And you can see on this slide that over 19,000 candidates have now passed SQE1. That represents an overall pass rate of over 66% and over 54% passed on their first attempt. SQE2, numbers are lower, can't do SQE2 unless you've passed SQE1. Just under 10,000 candidates have passed that. A much higher pass rate for SQE2, not surprising. As I've said, you can't do SQE2 unless you've passed SQE1. Over 81% of candidates who have taken SQE2 have passed, and just under 80% of those passed on their first attempt. Now, the introduction of the SQE also paved the way for the introduction of the solicitor apprenticeship. And I need to say here that solicitor apprenticeships are only available in England, not Wales, and that's simply because apprenticeship policy is set by government, and policy on education and skills is a devolved matter. So I'm not going to say too much about apprenticeships because Kerry will cover these shortly. But as you can see from the stats, solicitor apprentices are performing really very well in the SQE. And in most sittings, their pass rates have been higher than the general cohort. We're absolutely delighted to see how well solicitor apprentices are performing. And we're also delighted, and Kerry, I'm sure we'll say more about this, to see how the solicitor apprenticeship opportunity is opening up access to the profession. Just finally, headline of the total number of people who've now qualified as a solicitor under the SQE route. It is now the main pathway to qualification. This number will increase very dramatically over coming years. But congratulations to everybody, those over 8,000 people who have qualified as a solicitor, who have joined the profession after passing the SQE. That's all I was going to say by way of introduction. I look forward to your questions. There's lots more information, including lots more data and some nice case studies, as I've said, on the SQE website, and I would encourage you to take a look. Thank you for now.
Thank you very much, Julie. That was very clear. And firstly, I should say that I was so focused on my excellent panelists, co-panelists, that I forgot to introduce myself. So apologies. My name is Patrick Bolster, and I'm the Deputy Executive Director of Resources here at the SRA. I'm in the SRA offices in Birmingham, so I feel a bit like a BBC News reader. So you might see the odd person walk past from time to time. Right, so a couple of questions for you, Julie, from myself. What lessons have been learned over these past 4 years, and what changes have been made in response to those lessons?
Thanks, Patrick. Well, after each sitting, all candidates are asked to give their feedback, and they're also invited to attend focus groups. We meet regularly with training providers. We are listening and responding, and changes have been made to the way in which the assessment, the SQE, is administered, but nothing has changed about the method of the assessment, and critically, the standard has remained constant. So the main changes that have been made in response to feedback are an overhaul of the booking arrangements. Early on, candidates were having to join quite lengthy virtual queues in order to book their seat. That has gone. In response to demand, Kaplan has provided more and more centres, particularly in London. That is where the demand is at its peak, and that's centres both of the written and the oral assessments. Candidates who apply for a reasonable adjustment, so that's disabled candidates, have sometimes found the application arrangements a little bit clunky. And so the means by which candidates apply for a reasonable adjustment has been made much more easily accessible and more user-friendly over recent months. We've provided much more information about how the assessments work and how the standard of performance required to pass is set. And I suppose the other major change is the way in which results are presented. So early on, a percentage score was given. This is now presented as a scaled score. The pass score is always scaled to 300, with scores available to candidates on a scaled basis ranging from 0 to 500. And this just makes comparisons between sittings easier, because sometimes the pre-scaling, the actual pass mark has to be adjusted because sometimes a paper will be a little bit harder or a little bit easier than previous papers. But with the scaled approach, we have a consistent pass score represented as 300. I think those are the major changes. Each annual report, there's a section at the back which has like a bit of a "you said we did" section. So that's out the changes that have been made over the previous 12 months.
Thanks, Julie. Let's talk a bit about training providers. They're obviously key to this journey that we're on. How are we working with them?
Well, we don't regulate training providers. Again, this is another difference from the previous LPC regime. Organisations are free to provide training, and they are free, therefore, to provide innovative means of preparation. And I mentioned earlier, we're very pleased to see how the training market has responded. But although we don't regulate training providers, we do engage with them regularly. We ask them, for example, to forecast the likely numbers of candidates they think will come through for each sitting. We seek their views on the exam timetable. We, over the summer, arranged through Kaplan some sessions for training providers to help them better understand how the SQE1 questions are written. We did this in response to feedback from some candidates who said the types of practice questions they were seeing weren't always like the ones they saw in the exam. So there was that session written. And we also provide training providers, if they wish to have it, with data to help them identify the aspects of their course that might need to be enhanced. And that's based on the performance of their candidates in the different practice areas.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, well, I think you whetted appetites on solicitor apprenticeships, so I'm going to bring in Kerry now to tell us a bit more about that. Kerry.
Thank you. And what an incredible segue. You know, we are really, really proud of how the solicitor apprentices are currently performing. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm the Vice Chair of the Solicitor Trailblazer Group. The Trailblazer Group is a group of incredible employers of all sizes that represent the sector, who work together to ensure that the apprenticeship is meeting the needs of the sector, of our firms. And what's really great about it is how collaborative it is. We tend to work really closely with our training providers and also the SRA and Kaplan. So Julie's regularly in our meetings, hearing firsthand from employers as our Kaplan and responding to any questions we have on SQE. So it's really, really great to collaborate on this. So 4 years on, it's been incredible. So moving on, I'm just going to talk a bit about what an apprenticeship is for those of you that perhaps haven't heard of it before. Appreciate we'll have many different people in the audience. So the solicitor apprenticeship is a level 7 apprenticeship, and that's a really important point because I'm going to talk about apprenticeship funding a little bit in a moment. It's a 6-year apprenticeship programme, and it at basic level combines work and study. So apprentices can start straight out of school, they finish their A levels, they start with us on a 6-year programme, and they are earning whilst they're learning. They do get basically a day per week in order to study. A number of level 7 solicitor apprenticeships include a law degree, which is fantastic, but most importantly, they include the SQE at the end of the programme. So it does lead to qualification as a solicitor. And obviously, we're going to be really focused on solicitor apprenticeships in this particular webinar, but I did just want to mention that there are a couple of other legal apprenticeships. This is not all of them, but the level 3 paralegal apprenticeship is a program that's been around for a long time, and actually it's a 2-year program that potentially leads to progression onto either a level 5 or level 7. And I also wanted to highlight the level 5 advanced paralegal because this has recently been signed off, and this is a 2-year program that again could be a progression route to level 7. In the apprenticeship space, we've always liked what we call step-offs, where people can step off and gain a qualification. There are a couple of things to think about from a funding point of view, actually, though, which I'm going to cover in a moment. So moving on to a little bit of information around funding. There have been a few changes in this space with the introduction of the new Growth and Skills Levy, which is replacing what we used to call the Apprenticeship Levy. Now, the levy applies to employers with an annual payroll of £3 million or more. So I know there'll be a number of employers on the call where they will have an apprenticeship levy, which they may or may not know much about. And that levy can only be spent on apprenticeships. And I'll talk a bit more in a moment about what that covers. But one thing I do like to highlight is that if you are a non-levy paying firm, you can still recruit apprentices, and we really encourage you to do so. And you can actually access 95% of government co-funding, which then hopefully makes apprenticeships a little bit more financially viable for firms of all sizes. And actually, I've been spending a lot of time working with the Trailblazer Group and the Law Society in particular around promoting these opportunities to any SMEs. And there's lots of information out there about how you might be able to take on an apprentice, because we have so many young people wanting to do an apprenticeship, but there are not enough opportunities. And actually, most of the larger firms, the levy paying firms, are already offering them. So actually, the more SMEs that offer, the more opportunities there are for just some incredible young people. I'll talk a bit more about them in a moment. The levy doesn't cover everything. What it does cover is training provider fees, SQE preparation, and the cost of SQE, which is incredible. What it doesn't cover, this is an important point, it doesn't cover apprentice salaries. So that's the important consideration for firms planning their apprenticeship strategy. I'm going to move on and talk a bit about the benefits of an apprenticeship. So there are so many, and I could talk for a lot longer, but I'm going to really quickly go through these. But apprenticeships offer significant benefits for both individuals and the firms employing them. For us at TLT, they allow us to grow and train a new generation of lawyers who are really well versed with our firm strategy and our culture and values. And we see them getting on board with that really from day one. For apprentices, it's such an incredible chance to build confidence, to earn a salary and work towards that recognised qualification, all whilst contributing to the success of a firm. You know, it's something that, you know, I wish was available when I was in their position. For the firm, the apprentices are bringing fresh perspectives, a new energy. They're super innovative. We know a lot about Gen Z. They're so creative and innovative. And that in turn is helping to contribute to our long-term strategy and growth. These, quite frankly, are our future leaders. These are our future partners, future managing partners. And I'm really excited to watch them on that journey. But one of the things that I'm really passionate about is diversifying the legal sector. So it is increasing access to a career in law. It's helping to boost diversity by providing alternative routes into the profession. And it is just at a high level, making it accessible to a broader range of candidates. And the data that is shared by Kaplan and SRA is showing that the solicitor apprenticeship in particular is making a massive impact, especially around social mobility. And that is why when I move on to funding reforms, I've got some good news to share with you. So, which segues me nicely into the funding reforms. So looking ahead, there are some important changes to funding that we've been hearing over the last few months, and the Trailblazer Group, alongside some other bodies, have been at the forefront of kind of pushing for the retention of funding for the solicitor apprenticeship, because as I've just mentioned, there are so many benefits to it. We did retain some funding, which is fantastic. It wasn't everything, but it was a win, actually, because at one point we thought we'd lose everything for level 7, the solicitor apprenticeship. But from January 2026, funding will be restricted to apprentices, only those between the age of 16 to 21, or up to 25 for those with an EHCP. That's a care plan or a care leaver status. That's a really important point. Just because this is an FAQ, existing apprentices already on the level 7 solicitor apprenticeship will be funded to completion, so please don't worry. But the sad news was it was a bit bittersweet. There is now a risk to graduate and mature candidates, as they may not be eligible for future funding. So, you know, we do appreciate that firms are having to quickly prepare for what that means for them, but don't let that put you off. Just look into what's available and what the options are. So that's kind of my quick summary and introduction. I'm happy to take any questions at the end or discuss how these changes might affect firms. But back to you, Patrick. I think you had some questions. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Kerry. Yes, just coming back from the firm perspective, first question would be, what kind of training and supervision is required from the firm?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because I think when it comes to apprenticeships, it is really important to note that it's a tripartite agreement between a training provider, the firm, and that includes a line manager and an apprentice. And there are roles and responsibilities for all three members. I think a line manager can, quite frankly, make or break an apprenticeship programme. So for us, it's really about upskilling the business on the changes. What is an apprenticeship? How do we support an apprentice versus a trainee? How do we support a school leaver? How do we help bridge the gap between school and working in the legal sector? It's just about making sure everybody really understands what they need to do in order to make that young person successful. An early career strategy is a firm-wide strategy. It doesn't just sit on the shoulders of early careers. So everybody has got to be brought into that.
Thank you. Is there any, I think you've touched on quite a bit, but are there any other law firm responsibilities formally under the apprenticeship agreement beyond what you've touched on?
I think a really nice point, because we're talking about SQE, is our responsibility to really set apprentices up for success on this programme. SQE is not easy. It is not the LPC, as we've already mentioned. And so for me, I would just kind of call to action to employers is to just think about, how are you going to support this young person? How are you going to reduce their caseload when they're doing SQE? And how might you support them if they fail? Because there are going to be fails at SQE1, that's inevitable. So how are you set up to support that person to make them successful, to support their well-being and things like that?
Thank you very much. Right, well, on that, I'm conscious of time, I'm going to bring in Sian, who has been very much successful on that journey, and tell us a bit about her journey to qualification and more. Sian.
Perfect. Thank you, Patrick. So yeah, I'm here to speak about my journey through the SQE. My journey began in 2022 after I qualified from my law degree in 2018. Unfortunately, at the time when I did my law degree, the LPC wasn't an option for me. Then in 2021, the SQE was introduced and I was the second cohort to sit SQE1. The SQE being introduced has been a pathway for so many people to become solicitors, and I am an example of that. And I then successfully did complete the SQE in 2023. I personally opted to study whilst working full time, and I used a course provider which was integrated with a master's degree. But there are many different options, including self-study, which can work for different people. So I would definitely recommend researching into the options if you are looking to do the SQE. But I also advise employers to look at the options for their staff as well. It can really help connect with your staff and understand the options available for them, for you, and what you can offer as well. And in relation to the qualifying work experience, which is required for the SQE, I obtained my 2 years qualifying work experience prior to completing the SQE. During this time, I was working in property law, and myself and my supervisor ensured that I was exposed to a variety of different challenges, tasks. This included client interviews, drafting, and so on. And I think it was extremely important that I had someone who was supportive in my firm at the time. I think it is extremely important. And my employer as well, when I embarked on my SQE journey, they didn't have any formal contracts or anything like that for the SQE route. They didn't offer any training contracts at all. However, when I approached them about my SQE journey, they were very helpful, accommodating, and provided time off to study. It allowed me to attend my course, not to use holiday to take time off for exams, and this alleviated a lot of pressure. And I'm a big advocate for employers to look at what they offer for aspiring solicitors embarking on this journey.
Thanks very much. Can I probe a bit more on the work in your job and how it helped you develop the skills assessed in SQE2?
Yeah, absolutely. So my role at the time, and even now, you're always developing skills, but it helped develop key skills for the SQE2. So, for example, being face to face with clients, drafting legal documents, and especially dealing with unexpected situations, the job role can allow solicitors and allow me to develop the key skills for SQE2. Because I think working in a law firm can be very valuable to get hands-on experience. And it just helped develop client interviewing skills, drafting skills, and just general speaking and confidence as well. And I would recommend anyone taking on the SQE to try and get some form of placement or work experience just to really drive forward the skills assessed in SQE2.
Okay, and let's just talk about, were there any workplace policies that made studying easier or harder? And/or, it's very easy to talk about policies, what about the actual culture of the firm? I'm sure that must have played a part.
Yeah, definitely. I think culture is a huge thing in firms, especially when you are taking on, you know, such a huge task such as the SQE. I think that it was very important that you know, my managers and supervisors had an open door policy. They were really flexible with hours and quite accommodating. Obviously to a certain extent, but it was just nice knowing that there was an open door policy and the culture was as such. It just made it feel, as an employer, you are listening to your employees if they need any help. You know, it's just a reminder that the SQE benefits obviously the aspiring solicitor, but also the firm as well. So I just think any policies and cultures firms can put in place for aspiring solicitors, just to help them, even if it is days off for study or just to have someone to talk to, I think it is extremely important.
Thanks for sharing that, really positive experiences there. So I'm going to bring Kerry back in, please, just to go back to the firm perspective, having seen your perspective from the SQE journey through. So Kerry, looking at TLT's wider training opportunities, do you still offer training contracts alongside the apprenticeships?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when I started about 3.5 years ago, there was just what we were calling the traditional route, the training contract route. And then we expanded that out and started offering the apprenticeship route as well. But we didn't want to start reducing numbers on one side only to increase on another. We wanted to bring in the apprenticeship to bring in extra talent. And I think it's really important to make sure that there are alternative routes for people to go down depending on their situation. There are people that do the apprenticeship because you go into university or doing a training contract is just not actually possible for them. So I would really encourage firms to look at increasing routes to qualification, and certainly look at the benefits of an apprenticeship route if they haven't already started one.
Thank you. Let's talk about QWE, qualifying work experience, a bit more. How does your firm define and structure it?
Yeah, so all of our QWE kind of requests go to our lead training principal. But with the apprenticeship, I think what's great about QWE is it is embedded within the apprenticeship itself, and it does embed the SRA statement of competence. A number of apprentices will quite often build a portfolio of evidence to support that. And I think what's great about it is it actually breaks the standard down. So every term they'll work on a particular competence. I think that's what I've always loved about the apprenticeship space. You're building knowledge, skills, and competence along the way. And I do think that is why we tend to find apprentices are perhaps doing better, especially around SQE2 in particular, which is that more application and competency based assessment. So yeah, QWE, I like that the apprenticeship just breaks that down into really kind of much smaller bite-sized steps.
That's a good feature, isn't it? Okay, right. So we've reached the time where we can open the floor. So at the moment, we've only got one question, but I know from experience that when a chair says that, the floodgates can quickly open. So I'm not going to read out with names if that helps. It could be any question. I don't get any names here. So with the help of a colleague, they'll come through anonymously. So the first question is, I'm doing a law degree, but I'm not sure about what to do next as I live outside major cities. So I have few options for training contracts. What other options are available to train? I think I'll come to Kerry first on that one, if I may.
Yeah, of course. I love that question because I tend to hear a lot about opportunities in cities and some background. I grew up in a really remote part of Devon. And so what I love about SQE is that it has increased opportunities for those that, are in the regions. And as I mentioned earlier, it's not just the larger law firms that we have to rely on here in terms of qualifying individuals, it's the SMEs. I had work experience at a high street firm. And what SQE is doing is allowing people to go down this route, whether they are supported by the firm or they self-fund, and to qualify. So I think this allows for more opportunities that there used to be, because I know how hard a training contract is to get. What I would add is gaining an apprenticeship is also quite tricky. There are so many young people applying for them, but this does allow people to perhaps really study their options and think, is this something I could perhaps go away and self-fund, and, you know, a little bit like Sian did, you know, do it that kind of a similar journey.
Thank you, Kerry. Well, we've got a question for Sian. Talking of Sian, so the question is how you, Sian, secured the work prior to taking the SQE. Were you employed as a paralegal or as a trainee? Oh, sorry, actually, I've just seen Julie wants to come in on this. So, Sian, hold that thought. Julie, on the previous question.
Yeah, sorry, I was a little bit behind. I was just going to add in response to the question from the person who's living outside of the city, just to note, of course, that the freeing up of the way in which you study for the assessments means that there's lots of courses that can be taken remotely. So you can study from wherever in the country, or indeed from wherever in the world. You don't, of course, have to get a training contract anymore. You have to do 2 years of qualifying work experience. But firms don't have to commit to that 2-year block, and an individual wanting to undertake QWE can do that in 4 different settings, in 4 different employers. It doesn't have to just to be in private practice either. So local government, central government, commerce, business, charities, anywhere with an in-house legal department might be interested in offering qualifying work experience too. So sorry to interrupt there, just wanted to add that.
No, that's good. No, that's good. Just in time. Thank you very much, Julie. So, Sian, do you want me to repeat the question, or have you got that? The floodgates have officially opened, I can declare. Sian.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fine. So I reached out to local firms, looked on hiring websites, and ultimately began applying for paralegal roles, legal assistant roles. And I think it does help as well if you email firms directly, just seeing if there is any you know, opportunities they can offer you. And that was one of the way I did obtain my roles. And as well, especially when I did begin my role as a paralegal, I spoke with my firm and explained that it is my ambition and goal to be a qualified solicitor, just so they knew from the beginning my intention and that they could work with me on that as well.
Thank you. Right. Question from a named person, from Mandy, but for Kerry, I think, come to Kerry. We're a small firm offering only private client and conveyancing. Will this prevent us from having a solicitor apprentice?
Great question, Mandy. And no, not at all. It is probably helpful to let you know how our programme is structured. So over the 6 years, we have apprentices who sit in the same area or seat for the entire 6 years. Some firms do seat rotation. So if you have private client and conveyancing, they could perhaps do 3 years in one, 3 years in the other. But it's absolutely fine to do 6 years in one seat and to specialise in a particular area. It does not preclude you from doing a solicitor apprenticeship. And I'm really glad actually that Julie mentioned in-house teams as well. We have a number of solicitor apprentices working in in-house teams, which is fantastic because, as Julie mentioned, you can get QWE. You know, as long as you are meeting the standards of the apprenticeship. But Mandy, it sounds like you absolutely would, and that is absolutely fine. And I'd really encourage you to look at it further.
Great. Thank you very much, Kerry. Right, question for Julie. Can QWE be fulfilled through risk and compliance work?
So QWE, for something to qualify as QWE, it must be involved with the provision of legal services, and individuals undertaking QWE must have opportunities to develop at least 2 of the competences set out in the statement of solicitor competence. It's really hard to give definitive answers as to whether this or that or the other will count as QWE, and the decision ultimately is for the person, the culpable solicitor signing it off, to say whether it does meet our requirements. But just risk and compliance work could be a little bit I think difficult.
Okay, understood. Thanks very much. And now one back for Kerry. What are likely to be the apprenticeship opportunities for those who are over 25 years old?
Yeah. Before I come to that question, I'll just add something on the risk and compliance. I have a graduate solicitor apprentice working in risk and compliance at the moment. I know it is possible. I've met qualifiers who have done similar. So as Julie mentioned, as long as you meet the statement of competence, you're absolutely fine. But yeah, we have done and are doing that at the moment. Really great question around apprenticeship opportunities for those who are 25 years and above, or even 22, because as of the 22nd birthday, for most people, they wouldn't be eligible for levy funding. I can speak for TLT, but our vacancies will not have an age restriction on it, and we would be looking to set a budget for those that are strong candidates who are not eligible for levy funding. So, do have a look at solicitor apprenticeship vacancies and just see what other firms are doing there. And the other thing, I just mentioned a graduate solicitor apprenticeship. That is something that we'll typically see kind of going because of the funding. But that said, a lot of firms are looking at just doing something that is very, very similar. So we will continue to run our training contract, an internal only route for our paralegals, because we've got incredible paralegals who've demonstrated a commitment to our firm and perhaps an area of practice. They don't rotate, but we will still look to qualify them through something that looks like the apprenticeship route but isn't, and is something that we would commercially fund. And finally, for our school leaver apprentices or apprenticeships, there would unlikely be an age restriction, and I guess most firms would probably look to commercially fund those. So don't let that put you off, and just go for it. Have a look at vacancies, see if there are any restrictions, and perhaps just ask the firm outright what they would do.
Okay, right. Another one I think for you, Kerry. How are firms managing and documenting QWE? Is the expectation for the trainee themselves collating their QWE evidence for those who are on more traditional training contracts and not apprenticeships?
Yeah, you'll probably find this differs slightly. With an apprenticeship, the training providers keep a really close eye on how QWE is being documented. So for a number of training providers, there'll be a portfolio being collated with evidence that demonstrates the competencies of the standard, which is basically the SRA statement of competence. So that's quite easy for apprentices to document and evidence it. And as you can imagine, over 6 years, you actually evidence it multiple times, even though the requirement is only, twice. But I think for our graduate solicitor apprentices, they will often just complete trainee logs, just like our trainees. We try and ensure all of our graduates are doing something very similar to what our trainees are doing. And actually, it's a nice note as well, because on the 6-year apprenticeship, in years 1 to 2, you tend to find them working at a junior paralegal level. In years 3 and 4, a paralegal to senior paralegal level. And then in years 5 and 6, they become a trainee, just like our trainee cohort. So they will likely complete a trainee log similarly as well. And I guess the final point on that is just what I love about SQE is it's just really brought in parity of opportunity, but parity of esteem, because everybody, no matter what route they go down, will have done SQE. And so firms understand that, whereas before there were so many different qualifications. So that's just another positive spin on SQE, I think.
Very positive. Your passion comes through, even when it's via a screen, not in person. So thank you. I've got a colleague who's one of her strap lines is there's power in a process, and sometimes a process is a template. Why am I saying that? I'm saying that because Julie has reminded me that we have a QWE training template that can help record experience. So some of you will immediately feel a sense of reassurance on that, and I'm sure it's of a high quality. So we do have that as a tool. Right, so we had quite a few questions. Thank you for all your questions. There is still time for some late entrants. I will just pause there for a few seconds to see if there's any sign of those. Okay, so I think we'll come to a close then. All the resources we've talked about in this session are available on our webpage for this compliance conference. It's linked in the description below the video. Thank you to everyone for being here. Thank you for our panelists. We hope you enjoyed this virtual event. For all of you out there, the next virtual session, as I mentioned earlier, is the Your Compliance Queries, always well attended. That's from 2:30 to 3:30 this afternoon. We'd really like to hear your feedback, so please do let us know what you thought of this session by clicking on the feedback link below. It'll only take a minute, we promise, and it'll really help us improve what we do, which we always want to do. So thank you very much for being with us, and see you hopefully at the next session. Have a great day.